Join us tomorrow. Had this story on ESPN about Nick Saban and some of the reasons behind how all of a sudden he's gone and retired from college football. A couple of quotes from the article in ESPN from Chris Lowe. I thought we could have a hell of a team next year in 2024, and then maybe 70 or 80% of the players you talk to, all they want to know are two things. What assurances do I have that I'm going to play because I'm thinking about transferring? How much are you going to pay me? Saban told ESPN as well, Chris Lowe, our program here has always been built on how much value can we create for your future and your personal development, academic success, graduating, developing an NFL career on the field. The other part of this, so I'm saying to myself, maybe this doesn't work anymore. That the goals and aspirations are different, and that's it all about money. It's all about how much money can I make as a college player. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's never been what we were here to do or what we've been about, and it's not why we've had success throughout the years.
Well, look, it's okay to say that, like, this is a job for a different person now, and that you're in, because, again, there have been so many changes in rapid succession, and there's going to be more changes here in the next few years. You're 72 years old. Like, how many times do you want to restart and change and deal with it before you're like, you know what, this is maybe a younger man's job now, and he's fine with that, and he can go advocate in a way that's better for him. So, yeah, I think those things will wear you out, especially they'll wear you out if you're young, but if you're already thinking about this could be the end anyway, that's as good a reason as any to put on top of the Sunday of, yeah, it's probably time for me to go enjoy the rest of my life.
A lot of players have said, Craig, or coaches or anybody, that once you think about retirement, you are retired.
Yeah, I mean, I can't relate to that. I don't know if that's true or not, but perhaps for some it is. And, yeah, I'm just not surprised that a guy in his 70s who's been doing it for a very long time suddenly just is tired of doing it. I don't think there's any, big secret to unlock here. He won a bunch of national titles. He was at the top of his game longer than anybody else in the modern era. There's nobody comparable really to Nick Saban as far as what he's accomplished. And historically, people throw out a Bear Bryant, but the list is very short. So he did what he did, got to a point where it was just becoming a crossroads of age, frustration, the game changing, and he decided to make a move. Makes a lot of sense, and think that he'll be just fine in the post-football coaching world as a broadcaster and whatever else he ends up doing. If he hosts a podcast, seen people with the suggestion that he and Belichick should do a podcast together. Whatever he decides to do, he'll be successful at it. Game day, we know he's going to be involved there, and I'm sure he'll be, a mighty fine addition. And the game's changing. I think we basically talk about that every single day now at this point. And so that's just something people are going to have to wrap their arms around, and some people aren't going to want to do that, and that's fine. They can go find something else to do, whether that's as a broadcaster, as a coach, as a player, and then others are going to embrace it and enjoy it. But I do think that when you're college football and all these execs and these presidents are running around just trying to figure out how much money they can stuff in their pockets and how long they can keep the grift going before eventually the government steps in, which they're finding out was decades, and then in 2023, 2024, that narrative started to change in a major way. I think it's one thing to sit there and think you're going to break off and have your own playoff for those that have that idea in mind, and we'll just alienate hundreds of thousands, if not millions of fans, but we'll be fine because we have the biggest brands. But if you're also running off the Nick Sabans of the world because of the way your current structure is, I might take a pause for just a second and go, damn, like we might be needing to kind of just chill out for a second and kind of regroup and figure out if this is the way things need to be. And so I know everybody's scrambling for answers. Maybe when those answers come, whether it's a break off or it's government intervention, then it will all settle down and everybody will go back to the norm. But yeah, right now it's a disturbance across the board, whether it's coaches or whether it's fans in some cases. And for Nick Saban, I think is a combination of those outside factors and just the natural progression of wanting to go do something else with your life.
Yeah, it is. He's going to make a bunch of money. That doesn't mean he needs it, but why not? And he's going to have fun because he's still going to be attached to the game, and any kind of podcast would be awesome. I just always have enjoyed. He was the only coach each specific week, no matter who they were playing, who I would go back and watch either the week of press conference and or after a game press conference on YouTube. He was the only one. There's some I would go and watch it, whether coming off a game I covered or just interested in a big win by somebody or a bad loss by somebody. His was, to me, money every single time. So also, Greg Byrne, whose dad, of course, was an AD in college athletics, Nebraska, A&M, elsewhere. He had a 72-hour window that he promised the team. Saban spoke with the team. It was on, I think, a Tuesday night, whatever day it was, and it took 6 minutes. Byrne then told the team, who was the players in the room, he would have somebody within 72 hours. And then there's another story here that ended up with Kalen DeBoer, who he was, of course, a part of very quickly. But, Paul, there was a chance that Florida State would be looking for a new head coach with Mike Norvell, and that makes sense, too, as being somebody that was a candidate.
Well, Jimmy Sexton had them ready to move on, or preparing, because he either convinced them Mike Norvell was getting that job, or they were just so worried about Mike Norvell taking that job or any job that they came – got the extension done and agreed to. But I think the more interesting part of that is that their number one choice, had they had to move on, would have been Lane Kiffin. And when I first saw that, I was like, But then, look, if you're going to be the team that's out in front of everybody, like barking your way out of a conference, why not grab a coach who can bark along with you and be the persona? So I wouldn't have hated it. I mean, like, I wouldn't have liked it as much as I do like Mike Norvell, because I think he's an excellent coach, but wouldn't have hated it. I think I could have gotten on board with Lane Kiffin at FSU, but that's a very interesting to try to pull him out of the SEC. And the thing is that if you're going to be Florida State and go into the SEC to get a coach, Ole Miss is kind of a place where you can do that, because you've won a whole lot more than they have over the years. And, we're in contention for the playoff just this past year. So, yeah, I mean, it would have been a minor step down, in my opinion, as far as long-term goes, but not that big a one.
Yeah, I think the phrase used was prime candidate. So yeah. I don't know if he's number one overall, but certainly in the mix of top guys. And yeah, that would have been an interesting set of dominoes to fall. I think that would have been a solid hire for Florida State. But Mike Norvell remained their guy, fortunately for them, and they can keep on building what he's already started to build these last few years. So yeah, the domino effect could have been a lot crazier than it was. Just simply pivoting to DeBoer, and then obviously that affected the West a little bit, but Southeastern Conference and Southeast remained untouched, and so that was fortunate for the Noles that it worked out that way.
So they end up with DeBoer. It's a great article. If you haven't read it, it's on ESPN. It's not a paywall or anything like it. Chris Lowe, who will join us tomorrow, as Paul said before the show, he's going to join us tomorrow, really pretty much right off the top of the show. Also, Tony Caridi from West Virginia, voice of the West Virginia Mountaineers tomorrow on the Neil Brown extension, and also more. So there we are with the Nick Saban. He also made the comment, said the relationships with players just didn't seem to have the same meaning as they once did. And I'm sure there were coaches that went through the 70s, 80s, 90s at some point that may have felt the same way with relationships they had with some of their players too.
I think a very small percentage in comparison to probably what he's dealing with now. I mean, it's not even comparable. The 2010s are the only thing even somewhat comparable, and those aren't even totally comparable to right now. Forget the 2000s, the 90s, the 80s. I mean, there was no cell phones. There was no pay-for-play, NIL. There was no transfer portal freedom. And not saying that those things were good that way. Obviously, some of those things like transfer freedom and NIL needed to change. But, it's not even close to the same game. So, I'm not surprised that a man in his upper ages is not relating to the 18-year-old from a different part of – I mean, even if he was from Tuscaloosa, I don't think you have anything in common at that point. So, trying to communicate when you're a guy who grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, so on and so forth I don't have kids. I can't even imagine what it's like. I can't even imagine.
It's awful.
The frustration. Yeah. I mean, it goes both ways, but,
I knew that was coming.
the life of trying to just even interact with young people sometimes is, and I know for the young people, they automatically tune out because it's like, oh, here goes the old guy talking about, but I don't think you truly grasp of what it's like. It's one thing to try and communicate with somebody who actually acknowledges you. When somebody's not even aware you're 2 feet away because they're so locked into a screen, it's like a whole nother world. So like I can imagine how frustrating it is to corral 100 guys with cell phones, and then you got street agents, and you've got DMs, and you've got so much stuff to deal with.
Snapchat,
it's
all
just,
of it.
yeah, how is Saban supposed to relate to a lot of that if you can't even just, if it's not even normal to just sit down and talk about like where you're from and who you are? Like, does that even happen anymore? So in comparison to when you did that, because that's just naturally what you did, because that's just how life was. So yeah, I think if you're an older coach, then it's probably incredibly hard to be able to relate the same way that you were able to just even 10 years ago. And that's not the fault of the player or the fault of your own making. It's just the age gap, and technology has created that difference than what it was once upon a time.
There's nothing more difficult than if it's a child or someone that you're trying to teach, or let's say that they're zoned out. It's really, really hard. It happens. And also it could be the parents' fault too, but you're right. And now with all the distractions on top of it, I can't even imagine.
It's not, I mean, like, that's all the serious stuff. Look, do you know how old that Jack makes me feel every single day? And I'm going to be 44 in 5 weeks.
Willie McCovey.
Yeah,
Henry Aaron.
I'll be 44. So that's not old, but it's solidly middle-aged. Like, I'm at the halfway point.
No, 44 is young still.
So, but look, even things that I think I know about, and Jack and I will talk about technology, and then I'll say something wrong, and then he'll correct me, and I immediately just want to go, is there a place you can feed me soup and bring me a blanket when I'm cold? Because you do. You feel so old so fast and disconnected from what the now is. Look, when you're 70 years old and you're trying to keep up, and then you've got to go in. You know, Bobby Bowden used to go wash dishes in grandma's sink, and that's how they did it. Now, if Nick Saban tried to do that same thing, he'd go wash a dish, and be like, grandma would be like, how much money can you get him? And you're like,
and that was happening a little bit too, But
even then, like, now they're not even afraid to ask.
Right,
Before it was like, hey, do you have a guy that we can talk to? I just think about some other stuff, and then
I think it's different for a Sark, who's a younger guy. I mean, you can still have those relationships. Not saying it's impossible. There's plenty of programs that have great cultures, and I know just down the road, Dave Aranda's trying to ensure that it's kind of the way that it used to be, just at least as far as relationship building. But it's just so hard to do now. That's the point. Is that it's nearly impossible. As soon as you develop a relationship, that guy could be out the door the next day, no strings attached. So all that's to say that there's nothing wrong with it. It's just part of the way that life has evolved. People get older and they have a harder time, communicating with young people. I don't think that's even, it's just the maintaining of those relationships and just the constant cycle of it. That alone, much less all the other factors. Yeah, it's not a surprise Nick Saban decided it's just not for him anymore, and he'd rather just kind of observe from the outside and have his positive effects where he can on the game from the inside when the calls come.
MC Gusto, most of you people of today have no idea how to shake a hand.
I mean, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I've definitely had some awkward encounters with younger people. Of like, it's just I don't even know. Yeah, how to even like interact. Sometimes it's weird, and
if you get them to look up at you.
Yeah, I mean, and so again, I don't want to be old man yelling at cloud, because I know how that sounds to probably Jack and Emery right now. But I mean, they'll know in about 20 years. They'll understand, and I can't even imagine what it's like by then, and what Steve Sarkisian's saying about why he's retiring from Texas is because, whatever the issues are at that point in time. So yeah, and just in our world, the way that it is, it's not even an age thing so much. It's just the communication part of it. For a guy who grew up the way Nick Saban did, I can imagine it's incredibly difficult to try and replicate or duplicate what it was like when you were younger and more energetic and more able to kind of just let things bounce off you. Now it's like, is it worth the grind? No, clearly it's not worth the grind for him anymore.
And so there are some other quotes about the story, about the search for Kalen DeBoer, and also the possibility Mike Norvell, et cetera, that are in that article. Today, this is really cool. I saw this as a